Hey there, it's Austin Block bringing you some modern matches on the Magic Online beta. And this week I'm bringing you something a little off the beaten path. It's not really a deck we've seen in Modern outside of some fringe archetypes. We've seen sort of devotion type shells pop up with cards like, Arbor Elf, Utopia Sprawl, Garruk ramping you up to Primeval Titan and Genesis Wave. So that shell you might be familiar with, but this deck's a little bit different because we are brewing around a card called Freed from the Real, which many of you may not have heard of, so I'll leave it up on screen for a second. Has two abilities. This is sort of a limited standout. You could use it to sort of lock something down for a turn by tapping it, or give one of your guys pseudo-vigilance by leaving it untapped. But in this deck, it creates an infinite combo because, let's say you have an Arbor Elf or a Voyaging Satyr, both of which let you untap lands. Then you've got either Utopia Sprawl or Fertile Ground, which allow your lands to produce an extra mana when tapped. Then you put Freed from the Real on one of your untappers, like Arbor Elf. So let's say you have a Utopia Sprawl naming Blue. Tap it for blue-green. You untap it with Arbor Elf, and then you use the blue mana to use Freed from the Real's second ability to untap Arbor Elf. And now you're back to the same board state, except you're up a green mana. So you can generate infinite green mana, and if it's a Stomping Ground, you can also make infinite red mana. So then the question becomes, what do you do with all that mana? And there's a number of ways to kill once you have the infinite mana. The first way is Summoner's Pact, which goes and lets you get a green creature. So you go get Apocalypse Hydra, and since you have infinite mana, you can pay it for X's infinite or whatever, and then use all that extra red mana to throw all the counters at their face. So that's an instant win. The other way is Genesis Wave, which lets you pretty much take your entire deck. You just choose X as 100 or whatever. Flip your entire deck onto the battlefield. That puts everything into play. Apocalypse Hydra will die immediately, but then Eternal Witness will let you get back the Apocalypse Hydra, and you can cast it from your hand again for free. Kessig Wolfrun's another way to kill with infinite mana. That's pretty self-explanatory. So if you go off after you've Primeval Titaned or whatever, that's another way to do it. One way that may not be inherently obvious is Raging Ravine, because most people know what this does. You pay 4 mana, it becomes a 3/3, and it gets a counter when it attacks. But what most people don't know is that it's templated in a very strange way, so that when you activate it, it gets the +1/+1 counter for every time you activate it. So if you activate its second ability, say 100 times, and then you attack with it, it'll get 100 triggers and put 100 counters on it. So you can make an infinitely large Raging Ravine once you have all that mana as well. Other than that, like I said, the basic shell of the deck is just a ramp deck, ramping you up to Primeval Titan, which can get you some Raging Ravines and put pressure on your opponent. Garruk is one of the best cards in the deck because it can help ramp you by untapping lands and cast a big Genesis Wave, or just making 3/3s every turn and giving your opponents a hard time if it's more of a grindy matchup. The one thing I will say about this deck that's really annoying on Magic Online is that the combo takes a really long time to set up. Like if you're playing in paper, you can just explain the combo, do the first iteration, and say, I'll make 1 million green mana or whatever. You can't really do that on Modo. Sort of the same thing with Splinter Twin, but at least with Splinter Twin you only had to do it like 20 times. Here you'd need actually at least 50 mana or whatever for Apocalypse Hydra to work. So yeah, hopefully when we get into the videos that won't come up too much, but on Modo people usually make you do it. So anyway, this deck is freshly brewed. It's an idea and something I've been working on before, but still pretty unrefined, because one of the reasons I decided to build this today is because after Splinter Twin got banned, that really reduced the appeal of Snapcaster Lightning Bolts decks in the format in Modern. That remains to be seen, of course, after the Pro Tour, but that was one of the decks that really kept this deck down, because they just keep bolting all your mana creatures and you can never go off. But now that people are playing slower decks or combo decks, you have more room to breathe and you can just sort of do your thing, because the core strategy is very powerful. The sideboard's pretty unrefined, but there's a few interesting things to note, just like some random hate cards, Pithing Needle, Seal of Primordium, Relic of Genitus to help with, you know, problematic cards that we need to deal with. One of the things I like about this sideboard, and again, I'm sure people, if this deck becomes a thing, people will refine it and expand on these ideas, but you can actually side out the combo post-board, and your deck still functions pretty well. You can side in extra threats like Thragtusk and Hornet Queen and just rely on your ramp strategy. That's where the Summoner's Packs really shine, is post-board, when you can go get Hornet Queen or whatever you need to just take over the board in a slower matchup. Harmonize, same thing. I think this is a pretty underplayed card in Modern right now. Just really gets you ahead in the grindy matchups. Although it may come to be proven that this deck already has a good matchup against the slower, grindy decks, but we'll see. It's been pretty good for me in testing. I had 2 originally, I went down to 1 to make room for some other stuff, but anyway, hopefully you guys understand what's going on here, but I think the best way to demonstrate is just to do some matches, so let's get started.